Hey everyone, it's your boy Jafar coming at you with a very exciting New World gameplay reveal video. I'm super stoked to get to share this special footage with all of you today from the inside of the Amrine Excavation expedition. Let's get it! The Amrine Excavation is a dig site in the Windward territory just west of Amrine Temple, where famed archaeologist Simon Gray went searching to unearth the secrets of the ancients and their mysterious magical constructs. Simon and his team have not returned from their expedition for quite some time now, and it has been tasked to the players to venture into the depths of this troubled dig site to uncover their fate and discover what happened with the ancient technology they unearthed. At the entry of the dig site, you will find the infamous dog Barkamedes lying down by himself. You are of course able to walk up and pet him if you'd like. He clearly seems lonely, as if he has been waiting there for a long time for the return of his master. It's a pretty cute touch. With a level 25 entry requirement, the Amrine Excavation is meant to be an introductory experience to New World expeditions. Players will find that the mechanics of the puzzles and difficulty of the AI are scaled accordingly. Let's discuss my first impressions of the entire experience. Once you enter the expedition itself, after a short queue and loading screen, you will quickly discover that the entire excavation site has been overran by the lost and many very angry spirits. There is a series of tasks you must do in order to progress through and complete the expedition. You must defeat specific groups of enemies, unlock doorways to get to different areas, and interact with points of interest in a specific order. Overall, the expedition does feel a lot like an entry-level experience. The tunnels weren't too hard to navigate, but it felt like you could still get lost at any moment while you tried to complete the coinciding puzzles. I love that they include other things like puzzles into their dungeons to give them another layer of player immersion. Simon Gray and his lost team are a theme throughout, and you basically become the conclusion of this particular narrative. It definitely feels story-driven the entire time, and the things you do to progress all try to keep your attention on why you're actually there in the first place. The art styles, which are focused around the ancients and their mysterious stone structures, dominate the dark tunnels, and as usual are right on point. The whole excavation site looks absolutely stunning, and I found myself repeatedly just admiring some of the sights and sounds within the cavernous catacombs. I really was enjoying my experience the entire time. Let's discuss the enemy difficulty in combat. The enemies throughout the dungeon are relatively repetitive and similar to what you may have already encountered out in the open world up to this point. Although this is true, enemy encounters can be quite challenging at times because many of them have different abilities and attacks. This gives each group of mobs many moving parts, and as a result, it was never boring whenever we were in combat. Threat definitely played a role in all combat situations, and no matter which role you played within the party, you constantly had to keep your head on a swivel. I played a bow and hatchet ranged DPS, and ended up pulling threat off the tank multiple times early on when I didn't focus my damage on the tank's main target. I even ended up range tanking and kiting the first boss at a certain point with some level of success. Believe it or not, the difficulty of some enemies did feel a bit high, but I do enjoy a good challenge, so this was a welcome surprise for me. The level requirement is level 25, but the event was set up in a way that the players were all level 30 with the same amount of attribute points unlocked as a level 60 player. Our inventories were also full of green pieces of gear with different stats so we could load out our characters to our playstyles and weapons. So you have to understand, we were basically completely set up to succeed, yet we actually almost wiped down one of the boss encounters, as well as people did die here and there throughout the expedition. Speaking of bosses, there are two main boss encounters within the Amrine Excavation, with several mini-bosses littered along your path. The mini-bosses do have trivial level mechanics that made them stand out from the rest of the trash mobs you faced, and I liked that they filled this middle ground between trash pulls and boss encounters with something that satisfied me. I feel like instanced gameplay in most MMOs these days have a stark gap in difficulty between the regular trash mobs and their boss encounters. In my opinion, New World is trying to cover a wide variety of enemy difficulties in one space, and I can really appreciate that. As for the main bosses, I would like to go into a little more detail on each of them. The first boss is Foreman Nakashima, a purple specter that must be summoned using a candle that you pick up earlier in the expedition. Once summoned, Nakashima will suddenly appear, and the fight begins. Aside from auto attacks, the boss appears to have 3 main mechanics that I observed. The first was a single target shadow orb that he would occasionally throw at any player for a minimal amount of unavoidable damage. This was a low stakes ability, but the remaining 2 on the other hand were much more threatening. For the second ability, every several seconds the boss would summon a shadowy ring around a random player in the group. Touching the edge of this ring would result in moderate damage and a stun to the player, as well as stunning any other players within the ring. Sounds easy enough, right? Well, while the ring is up, waves of smaller specters cross through the ring from different angles, and the players inside the ring have to find the gap in each wave to avoid getting hit. Specters colliding with a player resulted in severe damage and getting knocked down temporarily. It was actually quite challenging even with the best dodge. The final ability was a lot like the second. A large shadowy ring would spawn around the boss himself, with the same rules as the smaller rings. But this time, instead of waves crisscrossing through the ring, the boss would shoot out in all directions volleys of smaller specters which could be blocked or dodged, otherwise causing moderate damage for each specter collision. All in all, I was pleasantly impressed with the difficulty of this boss encounter, and I implore AGS to keep on this track for future bosses. It really was a lot of fun. The second boss is the man himself, Simon Gray. Or, well, what's become of him at least. He appears to have transformed into a large hulking undead abomination with a cage around his head. He is found underneath a purple shadowy dome in a very large cavern, where a tall ancient construct towers over him in the background. It's a pretty awesome scene to walk into. When you approach him, he gives a nice little monologue. Whatever you say, Mr. Gray. Once he's done gargling, the fight begins. Compared to the first boss, Simon appears to be a simpler encounter. He has 2 main mechanics. Every several seconds, he spawns multiple adds around him that must be killed quickly. The reason is because he also occasionally vomits towards a random player, causing minimal damage and leaving a debuff on anyone who gets hit by it. The vomit remains on the floor for a while, during which these adds can eat, I repeat, eat the vomit, and become empowered. At which point, if they get near the boss, he will then eat the empowered add and become empowered himself. Yeah, I don't know if I'm down for all of this vomit-eating, cannibalistic stuff. Both boss encounters last several minutes, so their health pools seem to be tuned relatively high as well. They were not killed quickly, which I was ultimately very pleased with. When it came to loot drops and gatherable resources, there was definitely opportunities to find and acquire more rare items here. There was a list of unique gear pieces presented to us on entry into the expedition. Gear occasionally dropped from minor trash mobs, while some very rare crafting modifiers and materials dropped from the many mini-bosses we slayed. There was also level-appropriate gatherable resources like ore and plants that could be found scattered throughout the caverns and tunnels. Each boss had the opportunity to drop a powerful piece of gear for any given player. We also found lootable chests near their bodies that dropped a random piece of gear for everyone that opened them. I'm glad that AGS is adding unique gear pieces for given content like dungeons. This is something that typically brings people back to repeat completed content. I mean, who doesn't want to be seen carrying around that sick battle axe that no one else has? I'm just saying. To conclude this expedition overview, I would like to give AGS some criticisms as well as my final thoughts on the Amrine Excavation. My first and probably biggest critique is that New World mob diversity still feels quite lacking. When you only encounter basically 3 different AI models within the expedition, all of which you have already seen out in the open world, it starts to feel very repetitive. Even the 2 bosses are just a different color, or a larger model of the trash mobs found throughout the dungeon. This repetitive nature I have come to observe all over Eternum is a bit concerning. I will admit, I do have a pretty limited perspective at this point, so I have hope I will see a wider variety of enemies, even within the same enemy factions, when the game launches. Something else I didn't really like was the respawn checkpoints that you reached at different spots along the dungeon path. These are points of interest you can respawn after death. Respawns are not the part I take issue with. What I don't like about these respawn points is that players are allowed to respawn during combat, including during a boss encounter. That means whenever we died during a boss, the person could just run back to the boss fight from the nearest respawn point, and there really was very little chance for a party wipe. It felt like the difficulty of the content ultimately didn't matter, because death didn't feel very punishing. You just kinda jumped right back into the fray, no harm, no foul. I believe this cheapens the overall experience, and I encourage AGS to reconsider the way these respawn points work. Lastly, I felt like 2 bosses for an introductory expedition may have been fine, but according to their most recent patch update of the alpha, they reveal each expedition, even endgame level ones, only have 2 bosses. I really hope these expeditions aren't cookie-cutter reskin instances that feel nearly the same each time. Sometimes a dungeon should feel like a bit of a grind, so longer expeditions with more bosses would be a very welcome sight. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is just about everything I had to share about the Amrine Excavation expedition. This entire experience was totally amazing, and I want to give a huge thank you to the person who gave me this great opportunity. You know who you are. I love that I get to show off something new happening in New World. I'm so hyped for this game, and I can't wait to officially hit the shores of Eternum on August 31st. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you did, go ahead and smack those subscribe and notification buttons, as well as check me out on Twitch at twitch.tv/badguyfromaladdin. It's been your boy Jafar, and I will see you all in the next one.